Jacob Satovoy.
And we are here with Bree Lutzow, and she is going to talk to us about her contribution to the text and a little bit about her work in the justice reform system as a behavior analyst. So, Bree, for the people who aren't really familiar with justice reform, can you kind of just explain what that is, and then how you apply behavior analysis to it?
Yeah. Okay. So justice reform, it's definitely thrown around a lot lately with the election stuff. It's a kind of a hot ticket topic right now. I think before we really get into justice reform, we kind of need to get into what justice means, because I think a lot of times just that alone kind of we lose sight of what that really means. So, justice, when you think of justice, most people think of criminal justice. Really, justice by definition is fairness, being fair, being just, right? So, you would think criminal justice, okay, like providing consequences, just consequences to criminal behavior. And that's not really what we're seeing. That's not really what's happening. So criminal justice reform just kind of seeks to change that and move it in the direction to be what we see, and what we want to happen, because it's just not. And I think that's pretty evident. I think people are starting to realize, like, hey, this is a broken system and something needs to be done. So that's really what it is. It's just kind of fixing that broken system, and there's a lot of ideas on how to do that, and a lot of input from a lot of different fields, a lot of different people, and it can look so many ways, which makes it very daunting, really. But in speaking in general terms, it's just kind of, yeah, flipping that and to where it does what it's supposed to do, which is prevent future criminal behavior, right?
You could look at it as like a rehabilitation process.
Right. And ideally, that's what it would be. When ideally people go to jail, to prison, you don't want them to go back. And that's not really what happens either. A lot of people go back. A lot of it is for what they call technical violations. So, violation of probation, violation of parole. It's not necessarily that they're committing those crimes again, but they are still going back. And so what can we do to prevent that? A lot of it is those policy changes. So not necessarily something that me as a behavior analyst could just implement. Um, but a lot of things can be done by behavior analysis. A lot of antecedent modifications, teaching replacement behaviors, allowing them to access that reinforcement, that the reason why they're committing those criminal behaviors, having them access that in more appropriate ways, more socially appropriate ways.
So, can you walk us through how you would go about presenting these replacement behaviors, these antecedent strategies with, I imagine it would be considered a client or with a participant in the program that you're
Okay, yeah. So I work with youth. I work with incarcerated youth. I work with in the juvenile detention area. So a lot of antecedent modifications should really honestly start before they come in, right? There are changes that can be made. A lot of those barriers or precursors to criminal behavior can be prevented outside of criminal justice reform. Better access to public assistance resources, um, you know, more enriched education systems that don't necessarily focus on a four-year university, but maybe tech schools, trade schools, teaching skills, things like that. Like I said before, to access that reinforcement, a lot of times criminal behavior is for access, right? Economic gain, tangibles. For youth, it's a lot of attention as well. Attention from peers, maybe it's attention, even they're acting out, as some people say, for attention from their families. So allowing them to access and contact that reinforcement so that it competes with the criminal behavior. So teaching job skills, a lot of kids that we work with, we get them signed up to take their driver's permit course. And a lot of these, they're almost like behavioral cusps. So if you get your driver's permit, you're now able to drive. You can drive to a job. You can drive to school. There's just so many things that people don't think about, that those small things that we take advantage of, the fact that we can just hop on a computer and sign up for this and that, that, you know, other people don't have access to, especially when they're incarcerated. A lot of it too, you know, I was listening to a podcast the other day about a guy who's incarcerated, and, you know, your driver's license expires. He didn't have access to the internet to renew it, because you can renew it online. So when he got out, he had to retake the test, redo that. And it's like it's a continuous loop. Well, he can't get to a job because he doesn't have a car. He can't get a car because he doesn't have a job. So it's just these like cycles that are just perpetuated, because these skills aren't being provided. They're not being taught. These resources aren't being provided. So back to my youth. So a lot of things we do is, you know, the driver's permit, we get them set up for GRE practice, or I'm sorry, not GRE, GED practice, or, you know, help them in school. They are in school while they're there. So we do help them with school if needed, things like that. And then, you know, when they're about to be released, if they're old enough, we'll set them up with how to write an email, writing a resume, applying for jobs, setting up job interviews, so that when they're out, that stuff is lined up and ready for them, so that they don't have to commit those crimes to access those same things.
That's so beneficial, and so interesting, because you're right. Like, kind of, you're, as somebody outside, like, kind of, you're just completely unaware of the lack of resources, how those lack of resources impede any success outside in, like, kind of in everyday world.
Right.
What are some of the recommendations that you would make if you could make more system-wide changes?
Oh, there's a lot. So, you know, to start out, there's so many moving parts of the criminal justice system. So if you want to kind of look at before incarceration, during incarceration, after incarceration, before is a lot of policy changes. And it's not just directly to criminal justice policies, but also those public assistance. A lot of times people, well, this is for when they're after incarceration, they can't access public assistance. You know, before incarceration, before they have that felon title, like I said before, one of the biggest reasons crime is committed is for access, for economic gain. So, you know, starting early during like high school education wise, focusing on those skills, focusing on behaviors that can be acquired in place of that, getting them ready for jobs, getting ready for if they want to go to tech school, if you know, things like that. Helping, there's a lot of barriers for help. You know, there's housing, jobs, healthcare. If people are provided with just those basic things, they don't need to commit crime. They are more enriched. Their environment is more enriched. So they have access to other things and other methods of obtaining those things. As far as during incarceration, they have a lot of time. So why not take advantage of that and teach them skills and give them options? There are job programs in some facilities, and people focus on that. Well, they have this, they can go to school, but those programs are so small. Not a lot of people can access them. Not only are they small, the prison population is huge. So there's so many spots available. Not everyone can be accepted. So I think expanding those kind of programs, a lot of the rehabilitation that they use in the system is also not as effective as it could be. With the youth, for instance, there's a huge focus on like group therapy. So a group of kids together doing therapy, and that has the potential to re-traumatize children. A lot of these kids, majority of these kids have experienced some kind of trauma, whether that's neglect, abuse, witnessing neglect or abuse, things like that. So group therapy, I mean, if you think about it, when you were 16 and you're being forced to talk about something that happened to you in front of a group of your peers, that's not, I mean, there's just a lot of risks in that. So kind of like focusing away from this talk therapy group model, I think could really benefit. And for me personally, my position, I don't get to see all the kids at the facility. We get referred based on problem behaviors. If it were up to me, I would see all of them, but we can't. So I think, shifting a focus on individual needs, and then they do individual therapy, but that's a huge focus is on that therapy model. And I just think there's so much opportunity to do other things while they're in there, because this group therapy model it's traumatizing for me to sit there and listen to all of them, and it's not very reinforcing for them either. um, Implementing reinforcement systems, a lot of facilities do have their own reinforcement systems, but these people aren't behaviorally trained. They don't necessarily understand that children can't wait a month to access that reinforcement. They need it more immediate. And it's not necessarily the people implementing its fault. It's a budget problem. It's a resource problem. So there's so many things wrong that for people in behavior analysis look like, well, that's an easy fix. But it's hard because there's not a lot of behavior analysts in the system.
And the lack of resources, like you just highlighted, really seemed to be a barrier. That was one of the questions
Huge
that
barrier.
I had for you was, as a behavior analyst, like what are the barriers? And, it sounds like that's just the tip of the iceberg, really.
Yeah. I mean, so personally for me, when I like my job as a clinician in the facility, my barriers there, definitely there's some staffing barriers. These people are not behaviorally trained. They're also underpaid, overworked. It's a tough job. It's a really tough job. I liken it to like direct care staff in like a nursing home, a group home. Like that's the kind of pay they get. That's the kind of like intensity of it. It's hard, and they're not well trained. And I don't want to, point the finger at any one person. I'm not saying it's a facility admin's fault, but it's a huge budget problem. It really is.
One of the things I'm really curious about too, we go back a little ways, and I feel like at some point we had this conversation about you wanting to go down this road and do this work, and it's amazing that you've followed that dream, and you're doing it. One of the things that we want to open up people's eyes to and minds to with this book is that as behavior analysts, we don't just need to work within the field of autism. There are these other areas that we can go into.
Right.
Not easily, right, as you've showcased for us. But how does somebody who, we don't get this training in our coursework, right? Like, so how does somebody that's coming out of school or even has been in the field and says, hey, like, I'm really interested in this. How do I get involved in working in this capacity? Like, what might that look like?
Yeah. So I mean, I kind of took the same courses as everyone else. I say that I was in the criminal justice magnet program in high school, but I don't think that pushed me in this direction. I kind of left that in high school. But I've always kind of had this sustained interest, like with these like marginalized populations, like what can I do? And it's just always been a thought in the back of my head. And then as I did more research into like the ABAI special interest groups. There's one for criminal justice and forensics. And I just kind of joined the Facebook group. It was actually a Yahoo group. Um, and I was just getting emails and networking, and I just kind of like shot out a group email, like, does anyone know of anybody doing anything in Florida? Because there are programs. Auburn University has a really good program that works with their detentions, their local detention centers. So people brought that up, and I was like, wow, is there anything in Florida? And somebody reached out to me and said that they owned a company that contracts, and they go all over Florida for the detention centers here. And that's how it happened. I really just networked.
It's fantastic and like so
Yeah.
necessary. Like kind of you see the utility of applied behavior analysis and the application in reforming justice reform.
Mhm.
There's so many possibilities. What are some of the things, like kind of you had mentioned a lack of resources. If you had a magic wand and if you could instill more financial support in actually making a difference and focusing on rehabilitation,
Mhm.
focusing on success upon being released, what sorts of things would you, where would you put that money? How would you invest?
Um, oh, such a loaded question. Um, I mean, I think I would invest a good portion of it into the actual facilities. Because no matter what kind of antecedent manipulations we implement, there's always going to be people committing crime, right? It's unavoidable. Um, so I think I would invest a lot into the actual facilities because they are lacking so much. Into a lot more like recreational stuff. I think it's tough with kids, right? Because they're kids. Kids have different needs, and I think when people see these kids, they don't see them as kids; they see them as criminals, and that's a problem because they are still kids. They have needs that adults don't, as far as social development, and things like that. So I think just pushing a lot of money into that, more recreation programs, more, as far as skill acquisition stuff, like these kids, they don't know how to send emails. They need help writing resumes. A lot of them don't have the role models that people on the outs do. A lot of them are foster kids. Um, so I think it raises to all of the staff. They need raises. Keeping the staff motivated will benefit the kids a lot. So yeah, I think I would do that.
Oh, thank you so much. You hit on so many great points. And again, it's a population that we know very little about behavior analytically because there is only a very few programs and very few clinicians. So we so appreciate you sharing your experiences. It's been incredible and eye-opening.
Thank
Are
you.
there any resources, anything that you want to share that kind of helped you get where you are, or like kind of recommendations for people that are like kind of like, wow, I want to do what Bree's doing?
The special interest group, 100%. They've transitioned from Yahoo to Facebook now, so it's a little more organized. There are a lot of really, really cool people on there that share a lot of stuff. It's a really cool special interest group. It's different. Um, a lot of what's shared isn't necessarily like from the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. A lot of it goes, some go into police training. Some there's so many avenues that you can go down. But it's a great resource, and that's how I got where I am, really.
Amazing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been so interesting.
Thank
Like I said
you.
earlier, I thoroughly enjoyed reading your chapter.
Thank
Uh,
you.
so much new information, and it's really cool when you can, take your behavior analytic lens, and then, you know, focus it on something else, and then start to see, oh, like this is how we can make the change. It's just a matter of, you know,
Yeah.
reinforcement or skill acquisition.
Right, right.
I think we all kind of forget that sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, yeah, this has been great. I hope people get a lot out of this. And yeah, just keep doing what you're doing. It's
Thank
amazing,
you.
or it's really difficult, but you're cut out for it. So keep
Thank
going.
you.